We're back, baby. It's the Horns Up Talking Texas podcast. Fisher, Tosopoulos, DJ, Nikki, Snacks, Kreider, Gentlemen. It's a bit of a somber day once again. Bo Davis is leaving for the same position for the LSU Tigers. Uh, Something we knew would happen. It's not too big of a surprise. It's his alma mater. So going there and coaching at LSU is not too big of a shock, but we hate to see him go. It was such a massive piece of our culture, coaching staff, of course. The work he did with Sweat and Murphy this year was very heralded. We could all remember his, epic rant that was recorded, which was a whole separate issue we discussed on the bus. And many people point to that as like a big culture change for the Texas Longhorns. So Big Bo was, again, like brought a professional attitude, was a professional coach in the NFL, and he really brought it every single day. And, it was a massive part to getting us where we are today. And, I think he did his job as a Texas Longhorn, and obviously we would have loved to keep him, but we have a new co-defensive coordinator coming in from Arizona. We have PK. We lost Choate. I'm sure we'll bring somebody else in under those two at the defensive coordinator spots. And, we'll try to replace him. And that's all you can do. This, again, is the problem of being on top. Like, you're going to lose guys, right? You're going to lose coaches. You're going to lose players. We lost A.D. Mitchell to the draft, which I know we were holding out hope for him to stay. Unfortunately, he'll be leaving and he'll be going pro, which, again, makes sense for him. He's a guy that could be a late first-round pick, early second-round pick. And, we only hope for the best. And he gave it all he got. It's not a coincidence that he won back-to-back national championships and that we got to the college football playoff. He helped bring a winning culture, I think, from Georgia over to the University of Texas, and was big for Quinn's development and big for Xavier Worthy's development, having a good number one across from him, or co-number one across from him. So both those guys on their way. What are your guys' initial thoughts on Bo, AD, and maybe the impact they had in our program?
I mean, we'll start off with Bo. The fact that he was able to turn, 3-star Tavondre Sweat into an Outland winner, and, potentially being a first to second round draft pick in the NFL, and Byron Murphy, both guys being rated tops of PFF, in all of college football. It's awesome. And I am sad that he's leaving, but, the fact that Alfred Collins had as much time with him as possible and is returning for one more year, the effect has already been done. It's already set in, where I don't think he's going to lose what's been passed down to him from Bo Davis, and hopefully he retains that information and that mentality and that culture and brings it to his game this year. And then whoever steps in, I think it's going to be the right decision. At the end of the day, like, it's a position coach. It's not a coordinator. So, it does set a different tone as far as culture goes. But ultimately, like, position coaches, they are there to kind of establish a bond and a brotherhood and, just like a mentality within a position group. And so our wide receiver room, our running back with Deshard Choice, our defensive lineman, ultimately what sets the tone for that is the players themselves. Yes, Choice is an amazing coach. Yes, Bo Davis is great. But the running back room is talented because of Jonathan Brooks and CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue and Bijan Robinson. The players are the ones that make the biggest impact. And so I'm at the end of the day, like, you need a guy who's going to be vocal and be a guy that is bringing these players together. But I'm confident with what we have. And I think that whoever steps in is lucky to be the Texas defensive line coach.
Yeah, it's a very desirable job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it makes it that much easier of a pill to swallow when he's going to his former alma mater, right? He's getting
personal.
He's getting paid more than he was at Texas. We were paying him $1 million a year. His salary starts off at $1.25 million next year. He also gets to coach his son, which we heard was one of the biggest factors in his decision making. His son is also named Bo, but it's not B-O, it's B-E-A-U, which to me is a massive indicator that he was headed to LSU to coach there at some point, right?
No X though.
No X. That's very, very true. But I think he was
running the Victorian
defensive line grad transfer from Southeastern Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I think just by way of the transferring rules, he can get to LSU in January he can get to LSU this semester as opposed to the 40 acres. He would have been able to get to Austin in May by way of whichever rules, which, like, I don't know. They're so confusing at this point. It's hard to keep track of them.
Yeah,
but he wants to coach his son, right? And you understand that. And so, tip of the cap to him and all the work that he did. I mean, he was crucial in building this culture, but now we just hope that the culture that was established from the top down with Sark, and of course, worth mentioning CDC in there as well, because he's obviously a part of all of those hires. We'll still bring someone else in, and I love that we have that culture established already. One name that I'd like to throw out there is Frank Okam, who was a defensive lineman in the 2000s for the Horns. He most recently was a D line coach at Toledo in Ohio, but he's been the coach at Baylor. He coached for the Panthers for 2 years. He's been all over, but well, I mean, Josh, you made that face, but Brian Burns, he coached Brian Burns.
No, I just make the face of the Panthers. They actually have players. Derek Brown and Brian Burns are good players, but the Panthers organization stinks. So that's why I make the bleak face.
Most importantly, he was with the Texas Longhorns during the Mac Brown era when we were winning, competing for Big 12 championships, competing for national championships year in, year out. So he knows what it takes. And I think he'd be a great guy to bring back onto the 40 acres. We've already got Gideon in there. We've got former Longhorns on the staff, and I love more former Longhorns rejoining, right? That's always cool. So that's a guy I just wanted to throw out there as a potential.
That's great. I mean, we obviously love solutions and, names being thrown out. And we also have look, PK, I know he's one of the co-defensive coordinators now with Nansen, and now they're kind of splitting those duties, I guess will be the case. We'll have to see how all that plays out. But he coached the D-line. He was a former D-lineman. He coached the D-line from his beginning years as a head coach up until 2009. So he's there to lend a hand. He was also the linebackers coach this year, so they can move him around a little bit. And then Nansen, we've been told, he's going to help out on the defensive line as well. And that's why you have these types of guys in their roles, and that's why you have co-defensive coordinators, everyone's splitting duties, and you want as many great minds in the building as humanly possible. Like we've heralded Alabama in the past for being great, and we've heralded Alabama, for having and, giving second chances to even guys like Sark, Bill O'Brien, and bringing the best minds they possibly can, and seeing how all these dudes work together. Even our former head coach, Chuck Strong. On the back of A.D. Mitchell, again, it would have been great to see him back. I wasn't, holding my breath. I don't think any of us were.
I mean, we were as aggressive as we are in the transfer portal because we knew he's gone.
There's no surprises. Like, look, going into this season, best case scenario, Jatavian, A.D., Xavier, even Brooks, they were and maybe even Quinn were going to get drafted. Like, that's like, at the end of the day, is what you want. You want your players to be successful. You want these guys to play their best ball. And it's almost a blessing that we have Majors and we have Ewers and we have Alfred Collins back. Like, we lost a lot, but we could have lost more. Yeah. And by and large, we've discussed it. We're a pretty young team.
Yeah. And I think as well, like having those guys come back for their senior years or even sometimes their fifth years, they probably look around the rest of the locker room and the rest of the roster, and they see that there's holes in veteran leadership. And every year, like, it's an honor to be a leader of a team. It's an honor to be a captain. Like, when I was there playing as a walk-on, like, my senior leaders were Malcolm Brown, both Malcolm Browns. Pretty funny.
Which ones do you like better?
It's like picking a favorite child, can't do it. Quandre Diggs, like Jordan Hicks, like those are guys, that ended up playing in the league. And I think that also just like, that gives you a lot of veteran presence that you can pass down to younger players and also mature you a little bit more for when you do get to the league. And I think it's really great that, Gabenda's coming back. And as we mentioned, Jake Majors and Alfred Collins, like these are guys that didn't need to come back, but they're doing it because they feel like they need to be the veteran leaders and prove themselves a little bit more. And, as we head to the SEC, you need that culture. Mm-hmm. So I'm really happy that these are the guys that are making their way back. But to go back on A.D. Mitchell, look, we have been as aggressive as we have been in this transfer portal going after multiple wide receivers because we knew, like at the end of the day, like, yes, we have very intriguing young guys coming in like Ryan Wingo and Jonte Cook is sophomore and Ryan Niblett and more. There's all these athletes, but you still need guys who have put in some good playing time, not coming straight from high school or not coming off of a freshman year where they've only had 8 catches. You need a guy like Golden, who scored 2 touchdowns on this like last year, this last season. And you need guys that we're looking at like CJ Daniels that's gone over for 1,000 yards and 10 plus touchdowns, and you need guys like that. It's just the nature of the beast. So respect to AD. It's fun because in Madden, it's not going to say Georgia next to his name where it says college. It's going to say Texas, where he got drafted out of.
That's exciting. Yeah.
Very true.
You're right, man. Like, look, and there's also no shame in bringing as many people in the building as possible and seeing, like, similar to coaching staff and seeing what you got. Like, will Daniels having 1,000-yard do end up bringing in CJ Daniels, we have 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns? I don't know. Maybe not. But even if he does half that production, hey, that's 5 scores and 500 yards from the receiver position. If he's our receiver 3 behind Cook, behind guys like Wingo and Nibba, behind guys like Golden, who we're bringing in, who are really, more and more high on as the days go on and showed out against us, like, that's really strong production out of our wide receiver 3. So you don't know how guys are going to fit. You don't know how guys are going to step up. I think A.D. Mitchell stepped up even more than we anticipated coming over from Georgia and really amplified his production. Jonathan Brooks this past year stepped up more than we expected him to, especially after the first couple games, and filled Bijan Robinson's shoes as well as he could have. So Sark is going to get the most out of his juice. Get the most juice out of his orange juice. And we've seen it time and time again.
Is there any juice on the roster?
There's a lot of juice. I wish there was Juice Wells in the roster, but he went to Ole Miss. It's all good. So again, A.D. Mitchell, really great career as a Longhorn, albeit it was for 1 year. He did as well as we could have asked. And Bo Davis was a really big piece in us getting to where we are as a program today, and hopefully, helping us jump that next level where we don't revert back to a 4 or 5 loss team, and we're ever, going forward, worse, 2-loss team, which I still think with all of our losses, seeing who we have back in the building, we are in that range of a 2-loss team. And we spoke about it, like how we would have fared against Michigan. Looking at what Michigan's got going on and looking at what we're hearing, Harbaugh, it's no lock that he's returning to Ann Arbor. In fact, he may be going to Los Angeles, or he may be going to Vegas. He could be going, to the NFL and taking another crack at, the National Football League after finally getting over the hump and winning the national championship at Michigan. And, he had been at Stanford too. So again, with some really great players. So they're losing a bunch of guys. We'll see what happens with McCarthy, but we could be going into Ann Arbor potentially as the favorite. That's how good we're returning guys in the right spots, I do think, on the offensive line and at quarterback. So Georgia at home, I still really think that we're in a position that we're going to be a 1 or 2-loss team next year at worst. And Bo Davis is a massive part of that. And I want to say A.D. Mitchell is a big part of that too.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just all of the hubbub that happened like after we lost that game to Washington, and the conversations, Longhorn Twitter, Longhorn Nation, within our own show, about like who we thought could come back and who might stay, who might go to the draft. And at the end of the day, like, now that pretty much all of the chips have fallen, it's what we should have expected, right? Like, objectively, I think the guys that were ready to go to the league are going to the league. Like, any of the guys that would have, right? Not really any surprises. And the guys that are staying, Majors and Collins and Benda, like, they have room to grow. And those guys might have been drafted, or they might have been undrafted free agents that had, found themselves on practice squads on NFL teams. I believe they're all NFL caliber players, but now they give themselves a better shot of getting higher up in the draft or being drafted. And so I love that for those guys. I love that they're staying. They're going to be excellent leaders in the locker room. And I hope that each and every one of them is able to raise their stock significantly. And I think they'll definitely get the opportunity. So it's just as funny that, like, everyone's we're like, oh, can AD stay? And it's like, realistically, like, he shouldn't have stayed. Right. And that's what he did. He was ready to go.
He was getting mocked in the first round by like being taken by the Kansas City Chiefs, at like the, top 28 to 32 picks. So look, if you're a first round talent, you go. That's just what it is. The guys who are staying, like, it's almost like they have a prove it year. They would have found themselves on a practice squad and maybe gone through a bunch of training camps and got cut. Like, this is a really big year for them to raise their stock and work their way into consideration. We've seen guys do it. Now, it's funny because if we looked at this team, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had guys like little Jordan Humphrey that declared a little too early and, didn't end up getting drafted where he thought he should have been. And luckily he's still playing the league, but I mean, he's not like, by any purposes like a star in this league. But for us, he was a big player that I think if he stayed next year, he could have worked his way up and maybe being a 2nd round draft pick and potentially had more value in the NFL than he does right now. But, I think that this is a completely different culture. And at the end of the day, I'm always going to say this: when guys go to the league and when they get drafted, it is a success for Texas, because that means more players want to come here and develop their talent here. That's what you want to build. That's the type of program you want to build. There's a reason why Alabama consistently out guys in the draft, and that's
guys go there. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
it
Saban's
translates.
getting old. Like Saban's getting old. He doesn't like NIL. He doesn't like transfer portal. Who
Isn't
cares?
isn't it crazy that like that translates to like a good college football program is putting
Yeah.
players in the NFL? That's wild.
Yeah, and it's also like I think it's very interesting you bring up LJ, like having a guy like Sark who comes from Alabama. Like I know he's been like around Washington, USC, but he's most recently come from Alabama. Having guys who are experienced and having a good culture in place actually helps guide guys. So I don't think they're sitting there in a meeting with AD Mitchell and being like, dude, we really need you to stay. Like, we'll give you X, Y, and Z and like are desperate. I think there's a lot of conversation looking out for AD being like, look, if you want to go, you're going to be a late first round, early second round pick. Good for you.
Sure, yeah.
If the benefit of you staying, like, hey, if you even do better than you did this year
Top
and
15 pick.
you could be a top 5, exactly. You could work your way up. So
But it's a gamble.
It's a gamble. Oh my God.
You could also lose stock. You could also get hurt, or you could have a terrible season.
We've like if you're going to be a top 10 pick, we always say, and like on our show, the Charity Stripe, if you're going to be a top 10 pick, you go. You don't you're like, all right, you don't try to run it back and risk it. Like, but if you're a late second or late first round pick, second round pick, and you think you have the juice and you're an underclassman to get up to that first round level, like and lock yourself in there, it can't necessarily hurt you. So I'm sure that's a lot of the conversation that was had with AD. It's like how with JT Sanders and even Worthy. Like that's a lot of what's talked about, and that's like what a part of the culture is not only helping University of Texas out, but helping all the players that come through that get to the next level and get to the next level at the right pace.
At the end of the day, too, like, look, we say this all the time in the NFL. If you get drafted by a shitty organization, that could screw up your development, that could screw up the trajectory of your career. Where AD is getting mocked right now in that late first round, like he could potentially be going to a Super Bowl contender.
Exactly. Like, look, I know I made a face about the Thurs earlier, but God forbid AD goes to Carolina. And look, wherever he gets drafted, we'll be happy for him. But we're talking about Pat Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs, or the Carolina Panthers. And we want guys to end up in the right spots too. So we're hoping that for the best for these guys. We're hoping he ends up, late first round. But again, if you go to the NFL, anything's great.